evolve as new guidance is received. We continue to follow the best practices as outlined by Public Health, the Ministry of Health, and the LIN as it relates to service delivery, including the use of personal protective equipment, or PPE. Management was very proactive and secured PPE early on, and so we had a good inventory before supply demands became an issue. We continue to manage our PPE stock, and management has done a great job ensuring our inventory continues to meet our needs. Our community resource program has done a fantastic job helping consumers identify much needed resources in our community, and where possible, we've adapted our programs to continue to offer them virtually. Recognizing how quickly things were changing, we provided communications to our consumers 3 times a week to ensure they had the most up-to-date information, to proactively answer questions, and to share the resources that were available to help them navigate through this unprecedented time. Management also provided the board with weekly updates, and the board committees and the board continue to meet virtually. We also continue to work hard to secure funding to help us deal with the rising costs of managing through a pandemic. The board would like to take this opportunity to thank the staff and frontline workers who work incredibly hard in very difficult circumstances. We also want to thank all of our consumers for your ongoing patience and understanding as we continue to provide the best service we can under very challenging circumstances. It is very important that the protocols in place be maintained during the coming months because unfortunately, the pandemic isn't over and we all need to do our part to ensure that our ILC community remains safe. The board of ILCWR is a governance board, and within that mandate is the expectation that the board will oversee the strategic plan of our organization. Over the last few years, several of our key strategic initiatives, including our move to a geographic model and the development of our community resource program, have proven to be extremely beneficial as we navigate through the pandemic. While we could not have foreseen a global pandemic, it does reinforce the importance of a strong strategic plan and the need to continue to evolve as an organization. We continue to work hard to find solutions that are ILCWR-centric, meeting the changing needs of all of our stakeholders, our consumers, our staff, our funders, and is also sustainable for our organization. The board discusses the independent living philosophy and how we keep it at the core as our service evolves. Staying true to our mission as we balance competing priorities is a challenge, as is the fact that terms such as self-directed care and consumer control mean different things to different people. We are lucky to have Samantha Walsh, our Director of Service, who is well-versed in both the independent living philosophy and also the practical realities of what that means today. The board takes these factors and guidance into consideration when difficult decisions are necessary. We recognize that this will continue to evolve over the next few years as we emerge in a post-pandemic world, as well as navigate through the new funding model from the Ontario Health Team. At the end of last year, we held mediated sessions with the support of community justice initiatives to give all of our consumers and staff the opportunity to share their feedback. The mediated sessions were the first step in helping to get to the root cause that was driving the feedback, and more importantly, to work together to identify options for how best to move forward. While the pandemic slowed the ability for us to continue our work on the CGI feedback and conduct further sessions in person, the board and management continues to work on addressing the feedback, and the board governance committee discusses progress and action plans at our monthly meetings. One of the themes we heard loud and clear is that we had let our consumers down when it came to communication, specifically around the decisions or rationale for changes that directly impact them. We hired a dedicated communication specialist earlier this year and placed a focus on providing our consumers 3 times a week communications during the pandemic to keep them up to date on what was happening. Communication will continue to be a key area of focus for us in the coming year. We also discussed the need to provide a mechanism for ongoing consumer feedback. And Samantha is here today to talk about our Consumer Advisory Committee and how we plan to use this forum for consumer feedback going forward. The board also had discussions with the LIN on the feedback sessions and our desire to ensure that we have a strong, viable organization moving forward. With the financial support of the LIN, a decision was made to begin an operational review of ILCWR in February. The third-party review will provide the board and management with a comprehensive review to validate areas that we are doing well and need to continue doing, but also areas of concern, and to provide recommended actions to address any identified gaps. The review will provide benchmarking of other organizations providing the same or similar services, and will also provide us with the risks associated with the gap so we can prioritize the most significant risks first. The organizational review will focus on areas such as scheduling, staff training, health and safety, allocation of staff hours to service in line with our LIN contracts, communication, complaint management, and the interaction between the board of directors and the management team. As I mentioned, preliminary work began on our operational review in February, and then the Ontario government issued their directive to stop all non-essential work, which meant that unfortunately we had to pause the review. I am happy to say that over the last month, we have been working with the LIN to restart the review, and interviews of potential vendors are scheduled to start next week, and we anticipate starting the review before the end of September. We will continue to provide regular updates as the review progresses, and the board appreciates the support of our staff and consumers as we conduct this important review. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to our ILCWR Board of Directors for the coming year. Bettina Urban is our Vice Chair, Matt Denza, our Treasurer, Martha Stout, our previous Board Chair and our current Secretary, and our board members Edward Feruzal, Abduke Melka, George White, and Jackie Prada. It's been a pleasure working with everyone in my first year as Board Chair, and I would like to express a sincere thank you to our consumers, my fellow volunteer board members, all of our amazing volunteers, and the ILCWR staff for their support, their hard work, and their dedication to ILCWR. At this time, I'll pass it back to Drew for our next agenda topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Up next, we have our Executive Director, Phil, talking about COVID-19 and our annual report.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully we're all having a good day today. So the first thing we're going to talk about is COVID-19. And I think it's important that I start with some thank yous. This has been an unprecedented sort of event, and I want to start with some it's really important to me, I guess, that we start with some thank yous. And the first thank you is to our staff. Thank you to our frontline staff. Well, much of the world was on lockdown. They continued day after day to come in and to provide, essential supports. And it was and continues to be an inspirational thing to see the staff working day after day. I'd also like to thank the management and admin staff, working at times weeks without a day off to ensure that we are up to date and in compliance with best practice, supporting our attendants as they navigate this new reality that was changing at times hour by hour. And the second group I want to thank you is consumers. Things are vastly different than they were last year. From screeners to universal masking, the experience in your home has really been different. We all appreciate the understanding and patience that consumers have shown as service has changed, as our procedures have changed, and as the experience in your home has changed. Thank you for your understanding and the support and encouragement you provide to our attendants and admin staff. As I said at the start, COVID is unlike anything any of us have seen before. From school closures to border closures to a multi-phase reopening of our community, COVID has impacted everything. In all of that, I am proud of the way we've handled it as an organization. As Sarah noted earlier, we started stockpiling PPE early in the new year, and have never been in a situation where we didn't have what we needed to keep both staff and consumers safe. We were early to the use of screeners for consumers and for staff. That was something we started before it became common practice, and we believe was a good starting point for us to continue to keep everybody safe. The planning and commitment to best practice has really shown some positive results. Our position of taking, and everybody who's worked with me is tired of me saying it, and probably never want me to hear me say it again, but our position of taking, working from an abundance of caution has really been worth it. We've also been really lucky. While organizations like ours have seen outbreaks and even deaths, to date, we've only had one consumer test positive and no staff. That's really something to celebrate in this particular environment. I'm proud of how we were able to safely support a consumer who tested positive, created a dedicated team around that consumer to ensure there was no way for that COVID to spread through the organization. Staff worked only with that consumer, and it worked. Everyone stayed safe. There was no transfer. And I'm happy to say that everybody is back living their life the way they were prior to COVID, which is exciting for all of us. Moving forward, we're going to continue to do more of the same. We expect to see some of the consumers who put their service on hold come back, but also respect the fact that for many, they put their service on hold to limit interactions with people outside their bubble, and that may very well continue for some time as Even looking at any of the numbers, the COVID numbers are not dipping at this particular time. While I think we all hope and dream for this to end, we're not through it yet. We will continue to follow best practice as outlined by the ministry related to testing and return to work, PPE, and all of the aspects related to service within a COVID environment. We use their leading as a starting point or a minimum standard. We're going to continue to approach everything related to COVID with an abundance of caution. With that in mind, I do want to acknowledge how tiring, draining all of this can be, and will unfortunately continue to be. We realize that screeners feel tedious and protocols at times feel cumbersome and restrictive. But we're doing all of this to keep everyone safe, consumers and staff. And we are going to keep doing all this to continue to keep everyone safe, both consumers and staff. The reality is, while we may all get tired of these protocols and that we're weary in this new reality, the virus is not. It doesn't have a psychological timeline on how long this should take, or a belief that it can't go on for much longer. We can't let our guard down now. We have to stay vigilant because the stakes are really high here. And that kind of brings me back to the sense of why I'm so proud of the work we've done by the staff and so grateful for the understanding and patience of the consumers. This is truly a deadly virus, but through partnership, hard work, understanding, and some really good fortune, we've been able to avoid the most dire of impacts of COVID in our community so far. Moving forward, we're going to continue to keep doing the things that have kept us safe, and we anticipate that we will continue to keep everybody safe as we continue to move forward. That's where we're at and where we're going with COVID, what our service is going to look like. And again, I want to echo those two important thanks, both to staff and to consumers. We realize this has been a long haul, and we are grateful for the time and grace and patience that you've all shown us as we've moved through this. Next, I want to transition, perhaps awkwardly, to a bit of a discussion of our annual report. This was in the package that was sent out. If you don't have a copy of it, please let us know. We will get you a copy. If you'd like a hard copy, we're happy to ensure you get a hard copy of the annual report. Much of what you're going to see for the rest of the conversation does pull from the annual report. We're going to talk about volunteers, we're going to talk about community resource and finance and all of those sort of things. There are a few things that I wanted to pull out to talk about because I think we did do some really exciting and interesting things this year. You'll note in the annual report discussion of the Tournament of Hope, and every year we do the Tournament of Hope, it is one of the most exciting parts of the year. It is fantastic. It was unfortunately in 2020, we had to cancel due to COVID, but we have continued this process and continue to distribute funds through the Access Fund. To date, we've distributed over $500,000, $500,000 to people in our community to provide extra support. And I think that's just something we should be immensely proud of and grateful that we get to continue to do. I'm also excited about the programs that we've been running. Our Let's Move program has been offered in partnership with Capability Accessibility, and it continues to go. I know we're even doing that virtually now with some of our opportunities to continue to create ways for people to be engaged and to stay connected. We also have a book club. So I'm excited because these programs to me speak to the heart of what we're trying to do as a center and what we're really about as a center. This is about creating connection. There is independence and opportunity, and we're resilient. We're not allowing COVID to stop us from continuing to have programs like Let's Move, or continue to have COVID interrupt our other sort of activities like the book club. We're continuing to find new and innovative ways to do the things that are important and valuable to us here at IL. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the year we had, and excited for a new year with hopefully a lot less COVID in it, though that does seem a little unlikely. I don't want to kind of step on any toes for what's coming next. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Drew to move us on to our next speaker.
Thanks, Phil. Next, we have Andrina Lockley-Brown talking about our volunteers.
Thanks, Drew. Hi, everyone. When I was invited to highlight one of our volunteers, I got to thinking, ILC has been very fortunate to have the support of wonderful volunteers over the years. And I was thinking back to all of the people and all of the ways in which people have supported our organization. We've had many receptionist volunteers, often that stay for years. Jim even started as a volunteer receptionist. And of course, our hardworking board and advisory committees and focus groups have donated their time and talent to make our organization better. We've had retirees leave the organization sometimes after 30 years and then continue to volunteer on our Tournament of Hope committee. We've had volunteer puppeteers. In fact, that's one of the ways I got connected with the organization 20 years ago, volunteering to help educate the community about, or children in the community, about inclusion and accessibility through the Kids on the Block program. We've even had dancers volunteer for a flash mob at a fundraising event in the community. So there's just been so many different ways that people have given their time to support us. Certainly serving on community events and fundraisers and annual events like the Tournament of Hope relies so much on volunteers, but we also have program volunteers. And this is Megan here up on the screen. She's a student at the University of Waterloo. She's currently doing her MSW, her Master's of Social Work. She came to us a few years ago now, and she has enthusiastically volunteered in a variety of capacities for us over the years. She started with Jacqueline in our seated yoga class. It was one of those occasions when somebody knew someone and they referred her. And I found that in my experience, many of our long-serving volunteers have come to us through a referral or through word of mouth, as opposed to maybe finding an opportunity online. But she helped out with the seated yoga class for quite some time, and she was just great, really wonderful, reliable, but also, you know, was helpful but didn't take over. She was really, really great, and I thought she would be great with our youth program. And I was currently at that time looking for someone to help with our Youth in Transition program, a program that we run and continue to run. Typically it's in partnership with Kids Ability in Waterloo. Right now we're doing that virtually as well. But I thought since she was in social work that I would ask her and see if she knew of anybody interested. And she said, I'm interested, I'll do it. So she was then volunteering in 2 programs and doing an excellent job, great with the youth. At first, she was helping with the dishes and then the activities and things, but because of her background, we started giving her a little bit more responsibility with the programming end of things and helping to facilitate discussions and guest speakers and things like that. And she also helped out at the retreat last summer, and the retreat is a weekend-long opportunity for the youth to put their skills that they've learned during the session through the year to work. So they'll come out to the Hidden Acres Retreat Center, and we are there from Friday afternoon to Sunday afternoon. It's a long weekend, it's a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of work. And Megan was amazing. You'll notice in this picture that she's wearing a blue sequenced evening gown, and that's because we had a prom on Saturday night with the youth. It was amazing, and she helped out in so many ways, and even our staff, our wonderful attendant, Crystal, that helps with the hands-on support for the youth, volunteered countless hours making prom decorations and all sorts of things. So when I really got to thinking about what people do for the organization, it's hours and hours in so many different capacities, and I'm so thankful for it. Eventually, our seated yoga teacher went on parental leave, and we started a new program in partnership with KWA, as Phil mentioned earlier. And once again, she volunteered to help. So she jumped in, and she comes out, or was coming out every week until we had to move that program virtually as well. She's just been really, really wonderful. She's not just devoted to reliable, but she's devoted to the organization and what we're all about, really cares about our community. And we're just so very lucky to have her. I do want to say before I hand it back over to Drew that there are going to be some more opportunities coming up to volunteer. And since I mentioned earlier that I find that through referrals and word of mouth is the best way to recruit folks, I will just mention that if anyone's interested in any opportunities coming up, you can reach out to me directly. And if you're looking for our contact information, you can go to the contact page on the ILCWR website for that information. Thanks very much. Back to you, Drew.
Thanks, Andrina. Our next presentation will be by Dan Lajoie.
Thank you, Drew. My name is Dan Lajoie, and in that picture there, I am the handsome fellow wearing the snappy hat. Unfortunately, I am not wearing a blue sequencing gown. I am a community resource coordinator with the Community Resource Program. I've been that way since 2018. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the Community Resource Program and what it does and what we're looking to for the future. So what we do essentially is help to remove barriers and reduce the impacts of isolation for adults and seniors living with disabilities in our community. And we do this through peer support, advocacy support, and information and referral. We are a cross disability program, meaning that if somebody identifies as having a disability, they can access our supports. We don't require any lengthy intake process, and our program is free to all, which is important. It's nice not to have to pay for things these days. So what are these sort of programs that we do? So peer resource, individual advocacy, and information referral are traditional Independent Living Canada programs. They've been around for decades. And for those of you who have been around IL for as long as maybe myself, then you've seen many imaginings of these programs and how they're delivered. Traditionally, they happened through from head office, wherever that was in Kitchener. A few years ago, with the shift to geographies, ILC decided that it would make sense to also deliver these programs geographically. So the Community Resource Program was founded, and essentially the resource coordinators, myself and Holly, were coordinators geographically. So we were able to connect people to sort of the resources and activities that were where they were close to where they lived, instead of trying to coordinate everything from one central location, which made it difficult for some people to participate. We are a bit hands-on as well. We work with consumers one-on-one, hands-on. We sort of help them to navigate the community. We help them to access vital services. We do sort of teach and help learn some self-advocacy skills. And of course, we help connect with other peers, as that's often the best way to sort of get out and get connected. So we've had many success stories over the 2 years of this program. Some of them have been really simple, straightforward. Somebody looking for an accessible service. So we sort of do some research, make some phone calls, oftentimes talk to the business owner to find out if their location or service is accessible or can be made accessible. So those are sort of simple, straightforward ones. Sometimes they're a bit more involved. Over the past couple of years, we've worked with people who are trying to navigate ODSP or other financial supports. Maybe they're experiencing some legal challenges and need some help with some documentation. And of course, we had some that were even experiencing challenges with their landlords and some leasing problems. So in those cases, we get a bit more involved. It may involve filling out some paperwork. It may involve attending some meetings, maybe some assessment meetings or some appeals meetings. And we do so to help provide support so the consumer, A, doesn't feel maybe that they're on their own, and B, to help sort of communicate some of their needs to the outside parties. This is a really important service or support that we provide, simply because, it's not easy out there sometimes. There's a lot of complex systems and a lot of red tape, and it's not easy to navigate. So we've been fortunate to be able to help some of our consumers navigate some of that. And then, of course, finally, we have what you would call, I guess, complex needs, where an individual might have a variety of things that they're dealing with. And it might not just be as simple as, finding steps finding a ramp to get up some steps. It might be more complex, like addressing some emotional needs, especially recently with COVID. We've certainly seen a lot of mental health anxieties and frustrations that people are having. So we've sort of worked with consumers in that capacity. And sometimes we continue to work with consumers. It's not just necessarily a one-off. We will work with consumers multiple times over the course of a year or 2 years, or even on an ongoing basis. So as I said, COVID, I mentioned it earlier. So what has COVID done to our program? Well, certainly we've seen an increase in consumer needs. Maybe before, where somebody would have wanted a simple referral to an accessible business, now that same person might be hunting down PPE, or they might be trying to get groceries or other supplies, or maybe they are looking for some support for anxieties or frustrations dealing with COVID. So we have had an increase in needs. Luckily, when COVID came, sort of the big March 13th day, as they say, we were able to hit the ground running. We were sort of able to quickly adapt into a new virtual model. For the first little while, we spent a lot of time dealing with very critical services. So people who were trying to find groceries, right, who were trying to access their medications. I'm sure we can all remember that first bit of COVID was pretty wild. So we were able to do that. And as time moved on, we were able to branch out into sort of, how to keep people connected socially, how to keep them connected to their peers. We were able to create what we call the Consumer Connections Virtual Social Club. And for those of you who have joined us for one of those events, they're a lot of fun. I mean, we do board games, we do trivia games. We've had some nice casual conversations or coffee room style chats, and it's been really good. So we're looking forward to continuing that, and we're looking forward to the future. So what does the future hold for Community Resource Program? Well, I've got a bit of a funny story. So about a year ago, give or take, we started to apply to receive a grant to run a virtual program. Our idea was that we would sort of remove some barriers for people who might be more isolated, or for people who find it a little trickier to get out and about in town. So we wanted to be able to connect people virtually to our programs. So we actually applied for a grant to do this. And this was prior to COVID. So then COVID came and the whole world suddenly had to, become virtual. So we sort of made that transition naturally. We maybe a little bit of kicking and screaming along the way, but we're able to make that transition. And then we learned that we actually did receive the grant through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. So we're really looking forward to kicking off our new virtual program. And I will be your virtual program coordinator or virtual host. Really excited about the types of activities that we're going to be able to run. Just to give you a sneak peek, I mean, we're talking maybe doing joint movie nights, certainly the continuation of our social board games, maybe some online gaming, some conversations, some guest speakers. And the beauty of this is that, we can get guest speakers maybe from all over. I mean, obviously we're not tied to geography with virtual programming. So really excited about what this program is going to bring. Want to thank the Ontario Trillium Foundation, of course, for granting us this money. As Andrina had said, the youth and transition program will be moving into the virtual form. And that sort of brings me to my next little point, which is that, as some of you may have heard, my colleague, Holly, who's also featured in that photo, is leaving Independent Living Center. So I just want to finish off by thanking Holly for all of her work, dedication, and inspiration over the past couple of years. Holly's leaving us, and we're pretty sad about that, but we're also very excited about the opportunities that she's going into. So thank you, Holly, and I look forward to seeing and working with all of you over the next year. Drew, back to you.
Thanks, Dan, and thank you, Holly, as well. Next, we're going to hear from Samantha Walsh.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Samantha Walsh, as Drew had said, and I'm the new Director of Service. I'm very happy to have followed Dan because much of his work and Holly's work has really complemented the work of attendance services, and I've been happy to make their acquaintance. So for my update, I'm just going to reflect on some notes that I've made. So having started my role just under 6 months ago, I'm really happy to be here, sincerely. It's been a fantastic experience. And as has been mentioned before in other communications, I come to the role with some lived experience with disability. I use a wheelchair and I have cerebral palsy. Further to this, I really understand attendance services to be an invaluable support in the emancipation of folks with disabilities. I've been impressed by the vocal and strong community of ILC, and specifically their attendance service users. So it's been fantastic to have such a dynamic relationship and really get that spontaneous feedback from consumers. As Sarah had referenced in her earlier remarks, it is ILC's intention and a personal and professional goal of mine to continue to engage and mine feedback from consumers. To this extent, ILC wishes to revitalize the Consumer Advisory Council. So it still exists and continues to be quite active. I'm excited about many aspects of my new role, but the Consumer Engagement Council is one that is quite consumer engagement in general, and the council is one that is near and dear to my heart. And it is my hope we can continue with a symbolic relationship. Sorry, I meant symbiotic relationship with consumers and their feedback. Traditionally, the CAC has been a fantastic resource to the ILC community. The committee supported the shaping and revitalization of the mission and vision of ILC. Further, the community has acted as a valuable consultation resource in regards to modeling and creating attendance service policy and practice. The CAC has provided feedback on communication policy and really created an animated voice that informs all that we do, all that ILC does. They were involved with the work with the CJI and continue to give feedback in that regard. It is my hope and the continued hope of the organization, the CAC, will continue to be the conduit through which consumer voices are heard. Additionally, the consumer voices, such as those who donate their time, are a vital part of what separates ILC attendance service programs from traditional home care programs. It is my desire to continue to center the voices of consumers within my work and attendance service work. Currently, the CAC is a small group that we are hoping to expand to gain a more diverse sense of what the attendance service experience is. So we're hoping to recruit consumers from all different areas and experiences of life. So to use a colloquial term, walks of life, but that doesn't feel quite right as a wheelchair user. So again, variance in age, gender, heritage, and lifestyle. We would love to hear from parents using attendance services, folks who are working, people who are outside of the workforce, and those who are in general just passionate about service delivery. Sorry, I'm just moving through my notes. At this time and the unprecedented experience of COVID, the consumer voice continues to be invaluable as we continue to grow and shift with the changing political and environmental landscape. So the CAC continues to be in transition, but is something that I'm hoping to grow as I expand and settle into my role with ILC. Thanks. Back to you, Drew.
Thanks, Sam. Financial update is next. To present our finances, we'll have our board treasurer, Matt Denza.
Thank you, Drew. As the board treasurer and chair of our finance committee, I'm very happy to discuss the financial performance of ILCWR for the year ended March 31st, 2020. So on the financial update slide, this is really just a summary of our statement of operations. And for those of you that did look at the package that the ILC sent out previously, our audited financial statements are there, and this is a snippet from those statements. So as you'll see, as in the previous years, a majority of our funding is received from the LIN. This isn't significantly different from prior years, as you can see on the current slide, as well as in the audited financials. And base funding has remained fairly flat year over year when compared to last year, so March 31, 2019. Really, it's approximately a $6.6 million base, and that makes up almost 90% of all of the money coming in to the organization. The remaining funding coming in really is made up of a combination of a few things, such as fees for service, some donations, and some other grants as well. The other thing that I'll point out that you'll note here is that the year finished up with a fairly large deficit when compared to the prior year of approximately $201,000, as the expenses really outweighed the revenues coming into the organization. And there are a few drivers of this result when you compare to the prior year. First off, as Sarah and Phil had sort of alluded to previously, the organization has been really proactive in addressing the COVID situation, which is obviously very fluid within the environment that we're living in. So there was some spending up front in personal protective equipment, PPE, before the end of the year, even before the pandemic was declared. Just really being proactive and knowing that of what was coming. So really this increased our health and safety expenses coming into the end of the year. We obviously feel this was a really important expense for us, and noted with the lack of outbreaks that we've had, we feel that's really paid off. And this will continue to be something that the organization focuses on going forward. But we have also obtained some funding this year to make sure that our PPE stock will remain healthy going forward. Second, the second point that I wanted to mention that's sort of driving the deficit in the current year is the organization has appointed a third-party accounting firm really to help in completing a lot of the daily accounting and financial reporting duties, and to oversee really the accounting function as a whole. So this has increased our contract and professional fees expenses, as you would see in the financial statements. And the reason for this appointment was really twofold. So management really was in need of some financial support, financial reporting support, in which the duties were really taking away from a lot of the operational duties. And second, our external auditors had really noted there were a few control points within the organization that could be improved upon, and they noted this to us in their prior year report. The March 31st, 2019 auditors report had noted a few control recommendations. And as a result of this appointment, it was noted to us this year from our external auditors that there are no control recommendations to report. So we felt this investment was really warranted, and it was we saw the result from a clean audit report, and as far as controls go. I would say that the biggest driver that I wanted to point out in relation to the deficit is the $6.6 million that we receive from the LIN comes with service targets. So a number of people and an amount of support that we're targeted to provide. There isn't a specific amount per person, but a lump sum of funds to provide a total target of support to individuals. So this year we actually exceeded our hours and days of service targets that we were targeted to provide, which means we provided more service than what the LIN really targets us to do, which really drives the deficit further. So we provided 52,549, where our target is 50,643 hours. So 104% of our target in hours. So really, we are overperforming what the LIN is asking of us. Obviously, we're restricted by the funding, but we are happy to say that we are above their targets. So those were, I would say, the main drivers of where that deficit is coming. Obviously, we are restricted by the funding coming in, but happy to report that we are still above the targets of what the LIN is giving us. I think that covers everything that I wanted to touch on, just on the operational results. So Drew, I'll pass it back over to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Matt. For our last agenda item, I'd like to invite Phil and Samantha to join me.
Hi again, everybody. So this last topic is we're going to go through some of the questions that we received kind of prior to the AGM, the meeting here, and I'm going to have Samantha and Drew help me answer some of these questions because they fall into their areas. So what we're going to do, by and large, we reviewed the questions that came up and looking at whatever we kind of haven't covered yet or feel like we want to go back to. There were three major themes that came up. One was staffing, one was service, and the other was COVID. So we broke that into three different sort of question areas. So to start, we're going to have Drew do some talk a little bit about where we're doing staffing wise and what our goals are, specifically focusing in on questions of recruitment and retention. So Drew, if you want to take it from there.
Thanks. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I started my role in late July of this past year as the Director of Human Resources. And one of the benefits of starting a new role like this is at ILC is having the opportunity to review our recruitment strategy with a fresh set of eyes. This is going to include working with our teams across the region to maintain an engaged workforce. And over the next year, I'll also work with our community partners to ensure that ILC has the talent we need to fulfill the organization's mission. When I started with the organization and also navigated the recruitment process myself, one of the first things I noticed was that ILC has a strong and thorough screening process for interviewing, screening, and referencing job applicants. These are very important steps, and we'll continue to use them as we bring on new employees to work with us. Retaining our most talented employees is a top priority for the organization. However, the workforce in Canada is changing, and that does affect ILC as well. The older generation is retiring or preparing to retire, and they'll provide openings for new employees who have a different experience in the workplace. As ILC navigates this, we'll continue to find new and innovative ways to address this reality. As a younger generation fills more and more roles, we need to respond to what they're looking for in employment. Full-time hours, less on-call work, and attractive schedules that fit their different expectations on work-life balance are all things that we consider now as we're building our jobs. Like many of the items we discussed today, it's no secret that one of the biggest barriers that we face right now is the impact that COVID-19 is having on our employee base. Many employees have needed to take time off as a result of COVID-like symptoms that they've displayed, or they might need to have taken a temporary leave of absence due to any sort of personal impact the pandemic has had on them personally, such as childcare availability is a common example. Outside of these temporary leaves, our overall retention of employees is good. Our turnover rates are consistent with other organizations in our field, and our employee retention rates are also reviewed by our board of directors each month. We experience seasonal changes, such as the end of summer and starting the new year, but it's also worth noting that over the past year, our average rate of retention for employees is 96%. Lastly, I think it's important to mention that another top priority for the Independent Living Center is the health, safety, and well-being of our employees and consumers. With this in mind, in August 2020, ILC hired a health and safety coordinator to work with our teams to ensure safe practices, coordinate a safe and timely return to work program, and follow up on the items that are brought forward by the Joint Health and Safety Committee. That's it on my end.
Just looking for how to unmute myself as if this is my first time using Zoom. Thanks, Drew. Next up, we're going to go to Samantha to talk about some of the questions related to our service. Samantha?
Hi, everyone. So the two areas that I'm going to respond to is how attendance services is reflective of the independent living philosophy. And then I'm going to speak briefly about some logistical and scheduling questions we've gotten. I also want to highlight, this is a really interesting experience not to have audience feedback, but such is the life of a Zoom presenter. One of my strategies to stay calm while public speaking is to look at the smiling faces in the audience. It's not working today. Anyways, on to the questions. So first and foremost, when I think about attendance services, I want consumers to be well supported. Being new to my role and coming from the Independent Living Center in Toronto, as well as my continued work as board chair of Independent Living Canada, coming to the Waterloo region, I'm struck by how often independent living philosophy is used as a reference to a service delivery model. So it's a specific way of rolling out attendance services. When IL philosophy is not a specific service delivery model, but rather a philosophy that informs a social justice or social model perspective of the disability experience or the experience of being disabled. From an IL perspective, people with disabilities are understood to be the experts in their own experience and disability. Disability is understood as a valid social identity on a parallel with race and gender. So One of the things independent living philosophy does is it moves the experience of disability away from a medicalized perspective and medicalized experience into a social identity that has value and space within the community. For ILC, we see this every day as consumers make choices about what they eat, what they will choose to wear, and how they will fill their time. So what we think about and what I speak to attendants and supervisors about when we talk about these choices are providing consumers with dignity of risk. So the idea that you are allowed to make your own choices and face those consequences in a less professional way. I often tell people folks with disabilities are allowed to make the same silly choices as other able-bodied people. Now to move to a little bit more of a serious note. As Drew touched on, our workforce is changing, labor laws are different, and best practices have changed over the years. As we navigate that, I want to assure everyone that we have not lost our commitment to IL philosophy in our service delivery, nor are we going to. However, IL philosophy does not make us exempt from the legal and demographic changes to the workforce. Nor does it mean we are not beholden to the demands of our funders or the best practices for a global pandemic. So we see this in things like for every shift, we require our staff to read the full screener and go through all the questions, regardless of how tedious it is, because that is best practices for the pandemic. As the landscape of our funding and labor regulations has changed, ILC has had to shift their services. And typically, one of the things I think that is good to hold in tension here is ILC is not alone in this experience. The landscape of the workforce in general has changed. Who is coming to work has changed, as well as the regulations and environment for any job have changed significantly in the last 30 years. One of the really beautiful things about ILC is that it has existed for 30 years or about that. So in those conditions, we are constantly going to see an ebb and flow of change in the same way that any long-standing organization would. We will always hold true to the independent living philosophy by providing service that assumes the consumer to be an autonomous adult, giving them, as I said before, a dignity of risk. That's what happens when you go off script, to make choices about their own lives and the way they want to live. I'm going to do my best not to read this because I wanted to come through with the authenticity that I had desired. So myself, as a person with a disability, I know the value of being able to live in my own home. I remember when the last institution closed. It was only in 2009. The act of people with disabilities living independently is still a radical and revolutionary act at that. I'm proud of the services ILC provides, as our scope of service is in many ways larger and wider than most service providers within Ontario. Further, we are in a unique position as an independent living center rather than a traditional service provider because we have the support of community resource facilitators. So this is what I was talking about when I said having Dan speak before me is an excellent fit because our services sort of dovetail. To connect consumers to other forms of support that may not be accommodated by attendant services. Service models will continue to grow and change in response to a changing world. It won't be what it was because the world and environment is no longer what it was. So again, it's this idea that like, in the same way that individuals can't live in the past, neither can organizations. Our decisions and the evolution of the service will always be centered on consumers and a commitment to the independent living philosophy. And I sincerely believe that, like, as an individual with a disability, I feel like I am both personally and professionally invested in this because the experience of our consumers is largely one that I live a parallel to as someone who moves through the world as a disabled person. I'm excited to work with consumers to provide feedback to governmental bodies on the importance of service models centered around independent living philosophy. We have a unique opportunity as ILC serves folks and lives outside of a medical perspective and philosophy. The act of living with a disability in and of itself is still one of resistance and defiance that is never lost on me. I look forward to what ILC will build and shape as we move into the future of attendance services. And now I'm going to send it back to Phil. Thank you.
Samantha, if I can just for 1 second, you were also going to speak a bit about some scheduling.
Man, I was so proud of myself for getting through that and then did not scroll down.
Not to worry.
Incidentally, and Phil can attest to this, the most exciting part of my job is talking about independent living philosophy and how it informs political policy and analysis. The least fascinating part of my job is often the dry stuff.
I have never met somebody who cares more about IL philosophy than Samantha, which is why we're so excited that she joined us this year.
Oh, that's such a nice compliment. Thank you. So now I will, instead of just blatantly lying to you, I will now talk about service delivery. So as Drew has spoken about, and Phil as well to some extent, issues such as COVID and the changing workforce have largely shaped our reality as it relates to service delivery. So we get feedback in this as we navigate the global pandemic, as well as some staffing issues. In the immediate, we are working to communicate with consumers as quickly as possible, both the challenges but also solutions that we are able to find to these. So I'm hoping this is reflected in both the direction that I've given the supervisors to let folks know when there's going to be service disruptions, as well as an organization, we've been more committed to communication. At this time, I sincerely appreciate, though, the grace and patience of many of our consumers. And I mean this sincerely. I have been really heartened and pleased to get feedback from, of course, everyone is different, but a number of our consumers have been able to recognize and given me the feedback that they understand we're working through a challenging time. They understand that this is an unprecedented time pandemic-wise, and they're willing to work with us and support us as we try and manage attendance services within this complex time. And again, I think that just speaks to the symbiotic nature of ILC and our attendance service program juxtaposed with something that would be more medicalized. Long term, we're continuing to collect data to better understand issues of continuity and consumer satisfaction. Our goal moving forward is to improve issues of continuity and open calls. We are both appreciative and grateful for the rich data to come out of the work with the CJI, as well as our numerical data. And one of the things I really like about this, and again, I think this is something that is a nuance of independent living, is we have both numerical data, statistical data, but we also have the rich narratives of consumers. And this manifests in both the community, the CAC, as well as the individual consumers who have taken time to provide narrative. So it's never just cold, dry numbers. It's always not, and I shouldn't characterize numbers as cold or dry. I like narrative, that's why I said that. But I enjoy the dimension of the narrative, and I think that it brings a richness and information that we can really use to create dynamic policy and create lasting change, as opposed to something that's incremental or just driven by a numerical data. So we will continue to work with that, and that's what we will use to shape our policies. Again, I'm very excited about the feedback from consumers, and I look forward to using that for some policy analysis. And now I believe I'll give it back to Phil. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. And just to follow up, there's a few cold statistics that I did want to share. And I think it's just helpful. I want to draw back to something that Matt said when he was talking about our finances. This year, we over-delivered in our service targets. You know, what our plan was 50,000 hours of service and 30 some odd thousand days, and we over-delivered in both of our 2 reporting areas to the LIN. So thousands and thousands of hours extra service went out the door than what we planned for or what the target was this year, and I think that's something to be excited about. It resulted in a deficit, but it was service to consumers that we thought was important and we were committed to, and so we was encouraged and heartened to see the support from the board and what that looked like coming into this fiscal year. That, you know, as we made transitions and we transitioned geographies last year, what we saw was more service delivered than we had in years prior, which is an exciting thing to see. For context, I don't know if anybody doesn't the type of information that comes out all that often, but even in a COVID environment where we are slightly reducing the amount of service we're delivering and, you know, reducing total number of calls to make sure that we have less interactions, keep everybody safe, we still schedule over 6,500 calls a month. So there is a lot of moving pieces and a lot of people keeping this all together and keeping everybody safe and supported. And that is going to be the continued focus as we talk about attendance services. How do we keep everybody safe and well supported? That comes into how we do our scheduling. We have to make a scheduling change. They're based around risk and those around how do we keep everybody safe involved as we have changes. And that means that we take this abundance of care that if a staff calls in sick, you know, they are going to be out for some time because we want to make sure that we are positive it's not COVID. You know, if staff screens positive, and this kind of drifts into my last question, was around COVID and some of the pieces I want to circle back to. But with staffing, if a staff calls in and has a positive screener, they are out for 14 days or they're getting tested, because we won't have somebody come back because while it's unlikely it's COVID, we're not sure and we're not in a position to be risking your safety or other staff safety. So as soon as somebody screens positive, they're out for 14 days or a negative screener or a negative test. Just to reiterate some of the things we talked about earlier, because again, COVID is the thing that is impacting all of our lives. Everything we're doing is minimum the ministry best practice standards. Sometimes we extend those standards and ask for a little bit more from our staff, or ask for a little bit more to make us feel comfortable, but it is never less than what the ministry said is the standard. We are always at or above those standards. That's things like screeners. Screeners are still the standard and are going to continue to be. That's in staff return to work. We are following the best practice policies. We put PPE in place as it relates to best practice policies. And sometimes we extend it longer than maybe we have to, but we want to be sure, because we're not in a position to be guessing on something like COVID. There are questions, and I think it's a fair question to wonder what's going to happen if somebody tests positive. And like we said earlier, we've only had one case. And in that case, we created a team that worked solely with that consumer. They saw no other consumers, and they were with that consumer until that consumer was clearly no longer positive, and those staff were clearly not at a risk of having COVID. And so if we have an instance where a consumer tests positive again, we'll do all of the natural contact tracing and all the work, you know, supported by public health, and we'll make sure that whoever is supporting that consumer is seeing only consumers with COVID. We're not going to have a situation where you have to worry that the person that's coming to your home was just working with somebody who's COVID positive. We're very particular that we have a special team that goes and supports that person to ensure that they're safe and that we don't have the risks of outbreak, because as we saw in places like long-term care and retirement homes, the risk of outbreak is high, and we need to do everything we can to mitigate that. Similarly, if you have a staff who tests positive, we'll follow all the best practices. We're going to contact trace with the support of public health. We're going to make sure that everybody who needs to know has been made aware. Moreover, we're going to support everybody to get tested so that we can mitigate and control the possible spread or outbreak. We want to make sure that we're not in a position where something starts to spread through our consumer population. So if there's a test and it's positive, we're going to get everybody involved and use every resource to make sure that everybody who needs to be tested is tested, and that everybody has access to the things they need to stay safe. This is why we're so particular about making sure we have all of the PPE and continue to work with abundance of caution, because our goal here is that everyone, staff and consumer, makes it through COVID safely. And so we're going to do everything within our power to do that. As they kind of said, and I think Sam and Drew are going to reiterate, there are going to continue to be pressure points on staffing. At this point, we have almost 30% of our staff off on a COVID-related leave. And we are working desperately to try and hire new people in. We are posting, we hired 8 or 9 people last week. We're doing lots to make sure that we are backfilling those positions. But the reality is that this is still a pretty, scary environment for people. Living about in different homes and with different people outside of your bubble is the type of thing that not everybody's prepared to do. And so we anticipate staff will start coming back, but we also realize that moving into the fall, things like school and children returning to that are going to start to create opportunities where staff are going to be screening positive because their kid comes home with a common cold, and that's enough for us to say, you're not coming into work today because we don't want to risk somebody's safety. So we're asking for continued patience as we continue to navigate this. We are, as Drew said, following all the best practices and some innovative, tools around how do we get more people into our workforce? How do we speed up the process from hire to working so that they are ready and available, but not doing so in such a way that ever compromises somebody's safety? And that is one of the things we have to balance. We could have somebody who was hired working tomorrow, but they wouldn't be safe. We want to make sure that who we're sending out is safe and appropriate for those things. So those are the tensions we're working out as we continue to work through these shortages. Should we ever, foresee or run into a critical staffing shortage, we do have established partnerships with private agencies, but again, that's not who we are, because we don't know that they're going to do this from the lens that we want to, because they're going to come with a medicalized lens and not an IL lens. And so for us, we're going to be very careful about using agency type supports because the way in which we do our work is different, and we need to maintain that because our philosophy is different and our vision and mission drive towards something different than a medicalized application of service. So that is the last sort of bit on COVID. And with that, a few minutes over, my apologies, we come to the end of our annual meeting. Thank you so much from the board and from the staff team here for joining us today. We have recorded this and we'll be posting it up on our website, assuming all the recording stuff works out. And look forward to talking to all of you soon. Stay safe. Thank you so much for your time, everybody.